Okay, you've got a power concept all priced out, and you want to create it in GCS. Of course, the cost might be a bit too much, so maybe we can tweak it a little? Hey everyone, I'm Chris Norman, and this is the Powers video, Volume 2, Part 2, GCS and Min-Maxing. Now, some of you might feel that the term min-max has negative connotations, and I'm not here to convince you otherwise, but I'm going to explain how I mean it in terms of building powers in GURPS. Okay, maybe I will try to convince you. I look at it this way, and you don't have to see it the same way, but character creation itself is a kind of min-maxing. You pay 10 points for strength or 20 points for dex. Would it be better for the character concept if we lowered the dex by 1 and added 2 to the strength? Using GCS, you can quickly see how this affects your character. Did lowering the dex change the move or dodge values? Did increasing the strength get you to the next level of damage? These are all examples of what I call min-maxing. And this comes up even more when determining the cost of a power. So if min-max is a negative term for you, I just ask you to remember that this primarily occurs during character creation. Once the character is created, then it's all role-playing from there on. I mean, there are numbers involved. Players do need to know that a -10 modifier to their skill check is a bad thing. But otherwise, you don't get issues concerning round-off errors and the like while playing. And I want to answer one question from the previous video. A few people asked me if it was legal to put the magical limitation on both the affliction and the granted advantage Groot skin. Isn't that double dipping? I don't think so, and here are 2 reasons why. First, when an affliction grants an advantage, it's kind of a fire and forget kind of thing, meaning that the ongoing advantage does not need to be maintained by the caster, which sort of indicates that it's going on its own power. So I envision the magical modifier on the affliction as affecting the caster. Do they have enough mana? Are they in an anti-magic zone? And the magical modifier on the Groot skin advantage as affecting the recipient. Are they in an anti-magic zone? Or did they just get hit with the Dispel magic spell? Secondly, and the real reason why I think it's okay, is because of what Uncle Ben said. With great power comes great responsibility. So I am, as the GM, taking responsibility for the cost of the Groot skin. And I'm okay that it costs 1 character point less doing it this way, with the 2 separate magical limitations, than if I'd only used 1 limitation on the affliction. The affliction itself would have only gone from 12 points to 13. 1 point won't crash the system. Plus now, the granted advantage explicitly calls out that it's magical, and that's good enough for me. All that being said, I'm going to build the 2 powers from the previous video in GCS. And we're going to start with the fireball. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to open up some of the libraries that I know I'm going to need. So under basic set, there's basic set advantages, and then there's enhancement modifiers and limitation modifiers. I know down in the power section, there's advantage modifiers, and then power-ups has the power-ups for and 8 enhancements and limitations. So that's a lot of little tabs over here. Also, I have my own little library, and I'll show you how I use that. So we'll start by adding the innate attack. So in the basic set advantages, I'll go find innate. There we go, innate attack. He already has one for burn, so I'm going to take that and drag it over. Now he prompts for a whole bunch of various enhancements and whatnot. I don't need any of these at the moment. And then he's going to ask what kind of attack. Now, I mentioned before this was a projectile, and that's important because that will match up with the skill innate attack projectile. You could also put beam or whatever the matches to the skill, but we will put projectile. And you can see that if we open up the advantage and scroll down to the attacks, here's the ranged attack. If I select on it, scroll down, it's using the skill innate attack projectile. You can see the skills if we open up the basic set skills and I search for innate. There we go, beam, breath, gaze, and projectile. Doesn't matter that I have it lowercase, it'll match. So if I drag this innate attack projectile, you'll see that the innate attack burn, which has a current skill of 6, will become a 10 because I now have a skill at throwing magical balls. But getting back to the spell. So the first thing I want to do is add magical, which is in the powers advantage modifiers. Now it looks kind of funny, but I can grab this column and move it over. And these are the standard power limitations or power modifiers when you're building up a power. Now I know I'm going to be using magical a lot, so I want to add it to my own modifiers library so I don't have to keep opening up this one just for one single modifier. So I'm going to take my modifier library, move it over to here, and then I'm going to unlock it, which allows me to edit it. And I'll go back over here and I'll grab magical and drag it over. The nice thing there is it maintains the cost and the page reference and all that stuff. You can just build your own manually, but I like doing this. Now I save, Control S, my own modifiers, and I lock it back up again, move it back to the right, and now I can close this window because I don't need it anymore. And now I have to apply the magical limitation to this advantage. One of the easiest ways to do it is you just grab magical and drop it on the advantage. And you will see that it is now, it prints that modifier. Magical requires ambient mana and vulnerable to anti-powers. Now I go to the basic set limitations to find the reduced range, and I can use the filter reduced. There we go. I'm doing reduced range by 1/5. And then the basic set enhancements, because I'm increasing the half D range by 5. And I'm going to add the area effect. So I'll search here for area effect. But the number's not right. Well, that's okay. I'll drag it over here. And we now have an area effect. But I have to change it because I'm using the one from the Steve Jackson Games forums. And it's not the same, right? So I'll double click on this to bring up the advantage, and you can see all those pre-built modifiers in the list. They're not enabled. They're just there for editing purposes. If you want, you can click on a modifier and then just hit the trash can, and that will clean up the modifier list, but it only affects the one that's currently on your character. And you learn something new every day. I showed a pre-release cut of this to Rich, and he's like, you know, you can multi-select to delete. And I was like, no, actually, I didn't know that. Yeah, so if you select on one, I didn't mean to enable it, and then go way down here and maybe hold down this shift key, now you've selected all of these modifiers and you can just trash them all with a single click. But I'll scroll down to the ones that are enabled, and here's the area effect. And we need to change this. Now, instead of doing all the levels calculation, I'm just going to say that this costs, it's a 75%. It's not percent per level, so I change this to percent. You notice then levels goes away to the cost. And this is just the notes that are printed. So I will say, I'll type in what it is. It's 3 yards, 3-yard radius, 5 hex diameter. And we'll apply. Actually, let me verify with I did area effect 3 yards, 5 hex diameter plus 75%. Now we have to add the other things in, like cost fatigue and requires IQ roll. And this is where my own library comes in, because I already have an edited cost fatigue with the -10%, not the -5% that the basic set says. But hey, it's my world, and I think fatigue is worth it. And I need the requires IQ roll, which is power-ups 8. And I've already built the accessibility limitations for soft spoken word. I'll drag that over there. And small hand gesture. And then I'm looking at the points. I'm like, 7 points? It's not supposed to be 7 points. It's supposed to be 13 points. Did I do the math wrong? Oh no, I said it was 2 dice, which is 10 points. And I only put innate attack burn 1. So we'll go in here and change that. It has levels, but I have 2 levels of innate attack burn. And boom, 13 points. Same calculation. Yay! Now we'll do the Groot power. And this is one place where GCS doesn't quite help you out, and why I still do stuff in the Google Docs or the Tiddlywiki, which I'll show you at the end, is that the advantage that you have for Groot skin, you can't build that in the affliction advantage itself. You have to build it separately to figure out its cost, and then you know what the modifier is. Plus, I actually like looking at a spell like this kind of printed out so I can see all the modifiers, the enhancements and limitations, so that when I start to do my min-maxing, my number crunching, which I will talk about at the end, it's a little bit easier here. If you look at GCS, well, it's all crunched up. It's kind of hard to read here. You can open up the advantage and see the values here, but it's not as easy. But let me show you how we would create the Groot advantage. So I go back to the basic set advantages library and look for affliction. There's an affliction. I'll drag it over here. And it tells me these are lots of different things you can do with affliction, but we're just doing the advantage 1 point per level kind of thing. So I'll do that. And I'll open up the affliction and advantage 1 point per level. I'm going to enable that, but I need to double click on it because it's really 4 levels, right? The Groot skin advantage that we're granting was 4 points. So it's 4 levels, and that gives me the plus 40%. So now we'll add our other standard modifiers. So it's magical. Now the fixed duration modifier is a plus 0%. So you don't need to put it there because it doesn't affect the math, but you might want to so that people will understand, well, where did you get the 30 minutes from if you're just doing a resistance value? So I go to the power-ups for enhancements, and here's fixed duration plus 0%. And then I go to the basic set enhancement modifiers. And it's funny that it's in GCS library, it's not called increased duration, it's just called duration, but I'm doing the 10 times multiplier. And then I'm making this a melee attack instead of a ranged attack. So I'll do a melee attack of range 1, and then my standard kind of spell things. It's cost fatigue, requires an IQ roll. We'll put in IQ. It has a softly spoken word and a single hand gesture. And GCS calculates 12 points, and I calculated 12 points. Yay! Oh, I just noticed that my innate attack burn went down a point. Let me see what I did there. Oh, I dragged the soft word modifier there twice. So I'll get rid of that. And yes, it goes back to burn 13 points. And the affliction doesn't have the soft word, and it still costs 12. Yeah, let me add that in there. And sure enough, that extra limitation didn't actually change the point cost any. And it's because of the roundup. Because if I got rid of the one-handed gesture, then this would become 20%, and the math would look like this. And that still equals 12. Okay, we've built the powers as originally written. But as you can see, sometimes adding or removing a limitation does not actually affect the cost, due to the fact that you must round up fractional character points. And now that you see how powers can be built, maybe we can figure a way to make this spell a bit cheaper. I mean, if we can lower the cost 1 or 2 points, that would mean we could add 1 or 2 new skills. And so I'm going to do that here, actually. I would really love this. If I can get this modifier down to plus 0%, then the final cost will be 10 points instead of 12. So I just need to be able to come up with another 15% of limitations. Well, I know of one, the melee attack reach 1. If that assumes that you've converted it into a full melee attack, which also means you can parry with it. But if you don't allow it to parry, that's an additional minus 5%. So that brings us to plus 10%, which is 11 points. And instead of a softly spoken word and a one-handed gesture, I could instead change it to requires loud incantations, which is a minus 10%, and requires gestures with both hands, which brings the total modifiers down to plus 0%, which then means the total cost of this power is 10 character points. And the rounding error is very, very prominent when you're dealing with magic as powers like thaumatology sorcery. And why is that? It's because you only pay 1/5 of the full cost, round up, for each spell that you know. Thaumaturgy Sorcery and Powers Divine Favor, they both use the alternate abilities rule, which says you can have an additional ability. If you've already paid for one at full price, you can get these additional ones at 1/5 the cost. So what does that mean for our spells here? Well, if you look at You Are Groot, well, 10 points divided by 5 becomes 2 points. So this would be a 2-point spell in Thaumaturgy Sorcery or Powers Divine Favor. But if we look at our Fireball spell, 13 divided by 5 is 2.6, which means this costs 3 points as a spell because of the rounding. And here's where that min-maxing comes in. It really, it triggers my math OCD. So basically when I'm building spells, I really like to try to get them as close to a multiple of 5 as possible. Yeah, and you might go, oh, but that goes against the theme. And it's your choice. It is your world. You can do what you want. But if I'm going to pay 3 points for this fireball, I could actually raise the modifiers to plus 50%. And that would just equate to 15 points. And the spell would still be 3 points, which means I could get rid of 25 points of limitations. So I could remove those 3 modifiers and this would become plus 50%. The total power would be 15 points, but the spell would still cost 3 points. Okay. I wouldn't do that because in my world, I really want magic to cost fatigue. Otherwise, they're just going to constantly do it. But that's for you to decide in your world. Now, you might decide to start off with the 13-point spell, and then sometime later, provide a 15-point spell. Instead of removing limitations, I would probably increase the enhancements to get the extra plus 25%. So instead of an area effect 3 hex radius, 5 hex diameter, for plus 75%, you could raise it to a 4 hex radius, 7 hex diameter, plus 100%. The intermediate cost goes from 13 points to 15, even though the final spell cost stays the same at 3 points. And you could give it to your player at any time during the adventure and tell them that one evening they had an epiphany and figured out how they could make the spell a little better for no additional cost. This is how you build powers in GCS. So why, might you ask, did I use a Tiddlywiki to create powers? Well, it comes down to presentation. Now, if you look at GCS, you can see that the advantages are displaying all of the modifiers, all the enhancements and limitations on that advantage. But that's not really what our players want to see. That's more information for you, the builder. And so GCS does allow you to change this. You can either change the sheet settings here, or you can set this in the default sheet settings, but I will set it here. And you can say that you don't want to see the modifiers in line, you just want them to be in a tooltip, and you notice they disappeared immediately. If there were any notes, I would have them, I'm fine with them in line. But what I want to display is the user description, because normally what I do is I go in and I put in a thematic description for the players there. So I'll change this from tooltip to inline. And now you can see that the innate attack burn, you know what, I got to change that name. It's not innate attack burn. We're going to call that baby Fireball. And there you can see the user description, which displays there on the character sheet. The caster mutters the word of power for fire, spends 1 fatigue point, and rolls against their IQ. If successful, they wave their hand in the air to gather up the essence of fire. They can then throw the ball of flame up to 20 yards, 1/2 damage of 10 yards. The ball will explode in a 3-yard radius, 5 hex diameter, at a +4 to hit if you're aiming at the hex. Now, I put a few things in square brackets because that actually would be interpreted by the Foundry application to be a rollable button. So the player could just click on IQ and click on the +4 to hit hex if they were deciding to hit a hex. Why would you do that? Well, you've got an area effect. So instead of trying to hit the dodging idiot in the middle, just throw it at the area that they're at, and it explodes. Now, they may be able to dive out of that area. That's their choice, but they'll be on the ground. That's why area effect is kind of cool. So you can see that by filling in the user description, I can write up a spell in terms that the player needs to know. And we can hide the builder information, the modifiers, behind the scenes. So the GCS character sheet becomes the system of record. It's the final arbiter of what's on the character sheet. But it isn't as easy to use as a design platform. Now, I could create my own library and drag and drop my new spells, powers, onto the library so I could give these spells, to other characters. Sure, but I still prefer the whole written out format of the Google Doc when I'm designing a power. The only thing that's missing with that is the math, which leads me to the third video in this volume, using the Tiddlywiki, coming soon. I hope these videos have been helpful. And if so, please like and subscribe. Let YouTube know that this is worth watching. And if you have any questions, please leave them in the comments section. You know I'll answer them. And as always, thank you for watching.